definitely gives anyone cause for concern how you perceive the state of Nigeria's economy at this moment. Of course, at the behest of Nigeria's economy are Nigeria's economic policies. How friendly or not are they to investors or investments generally? And then, of course, many people are talking about inflation now. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? How do we control it? You know, all of those issues are part of what we would like to address in this conversation as we host an economist and CEO, GDL Asset Management Limited, Mr. Kola Ayeye. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So you heard the CBN governor talking there that there is no such thing as various policies, various prices as far as the dollar is concerned. There is just one rate, one official rate. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I'm not quite sure that's what I heard him say.
Okay.
What I heard him say was that the black market and a portion of the market have substantially closed, and that portion is dominant. He clarified that 305 is a budget rate and that there is another window where critical imports are at 330. And this is my rehash of what he said. You know, I think we need to put this in the context of the economy. Those policies may be well-intentioned, but one issue that is crucial now is that we actually have a fiscal crisis. And when you have a fiscal crisis, it's important for government to maximize revenue. Government has a serious budget deficit and a budget funding challenge. So even in that context, it's that context that I think that if foreign exchange could be sold at 360 or 350, it should be sold at that rate to everybody.
But what he's saying is that the investor's rate of 330 goes up all the way to, let's say, 359, 360 within the 180-day, business gap.
My preference will be that if some people go to the market today and the option they have is to buy the currency today at 360, give everybody that option. And the reason why I want to emphasize it again is I think in the budget this year, I think the budget for oil proceeds to federal government is 1 billion. Even if that will just increase it by 10 or 20%, where government is at today, they need it. And also when we're talking about, how foreign investors perceive things, I think generally when there is one rate, they feel much more comfortable. That's my view.
Now that you talk about how foreign investors perceive things,
yes.
Listening to the governor of the central bank, he mentioned about 4 or 5 rates. It started from 305.
Yes.
He mentioned 330 all the way to 350.
Yes.
Then he mentioned 361, 362.
Yes.
Those are, about 5 of them. So
Sure.
what does that say on one hand about the nation's economy and the policies we're putting in place, especially because we're always talking about investment. So as an investor, when you see those rates, what do you think?
Let me say again, let's eliminate the gaps. Let's have one rate. Let's also set an objective of the maximum gap we'll allow, even between the black market rate and the official rate. What that says to everybody is that there is a level playing field and it is easier to manage things. When, as you've said, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 rates, no matter how well-intentioned the objectives are, it becomes hard to explain to third parties. And naturally, the way rational economic agents behave is that if there's a commodity that has 2 prices, there's pressure for arbitrage. There's pressure, there's tendency for some people to try to see whether they can get at a cheaper rate and arbitrage it to the higher rate. It's normal, that will happen anywhere in the world. If you give me an opportunity to buy sugar at 20% less than its market price, even though you say it's for me to eat at home, that is not for the market, if I have access to it, there is a tendency that I'll see how I can get it to the market. So I think we should close the rates.
How precarious is the inflation rate we have?
Okay, coming to inflation, I encourage you, some of the areas where people like us, who call ourselves economists, need to do more work is we actually need to ascertain the extent to which the models we've learned accurately represent our economy. Now, inflation there are two schools of thought. There are people who say inflation is largely a result of monetary policy, what you do with interest rates and exchange rates. There are others who say it's largely driven by availability of goods and shocks about supply of goods. Now, where is our economy? Our economy is not in any situation that is close to where most of the world economies were when these theories were developed. Let me give an example. Look at the UK or a typical advanced economy. There are a lot of families who borrow from the banking system. There are a lot of families who have mortgages. And when you raise interest rates by 1%, the cost of servicing their mortgage monthly goes up. So immediately, disposable income goes down. So in those economies, when you tinker with interest rates, its impact on the real sector is quick and it's visible. However, in Nigeria, how many of us, for example, you raise interest rates today, Ayo, what does it do to you? How much loans do you have? How much loans do I have? So coming to how it relates to inflation,
right.
there is a certain kind of inflation that relates to changing the structure of our economy. That's a good disruption, and that we should live with the consequences of it. But there is inflation that will not be beneficial and that will be significant. And if we see that coming, that we should contend with. So before I keep quiet and just say something,
right.
You see, the inflation that is pushed by the fact that we've closed our borders, in my opinion, it is good inflation. It is inflation that relates to how to change the structure of our economy.
So you think it's a necessary evil?
For two reasons.
Okay.
Those are things we should produce. Those are things which we banned, which are not supposed to be in the market. Those are things that our neighbors are, because of our institutional failures, are taking advantage of. So those kinds of shocks that result in inflation, because it's inflationary. If you ban rice, the price of rice goes up. But we are banning it because we want to produce more rice. Those kinds of shocks, those kinds of inflation, we should live with. But the kind of things we've now not thought through is low interest rates are good. Stable exchange rates are good. Let's get away from the classical theory that says that interest rates must be ahead of inflation rates.
Inflation rate. And on one hand, do you agree with the CBN governor? He believes that in 3-4 months, things will even out. In fact, he says things might actually speed up. Do you agree on one hand with what he said?
The trend of what he's saying, I think the purport of what he's saying is there is a good reason for this ban. There's a good reason for this border closure. And we need to explain it and see it through. I don't know whether it will happen in 3 or 4 months. I think it's better to prepare the minds of the people for the fact that this is why we're doing this. This is going to be painful, but let's make it work.
Have we been able to school people on this? Because I think one of the issues that many people are having, of course,
Yes.
As far as this border closure is concerned, it depends on what side of the divide you're sitting. Yes. Some say it's been good. Of course, government is raising and praising it high, and even the CBN governor has said that over and over again. But then the man and a few other institutions are saying this is not helping our economy. So perhaps from what you have just said now, is the need to educate people on these policies that you're talking about.
Ayo.
Do you see government doing that well enough?
Not at all. Not at all. Our orientation and mobilization is extremely weak. And Ayo, do you see what has happened at JAMB? Without fanfare. There's what I think we should call the Ishak Oloyede effect.
How do you mean?
A man goes to JAMB without fanfare, an organization that usually paid less than 5 million to government, remits 5 billion after he succeeds in reducing fees by 30%. Ayo, corruption makes it difficult for free markets to work. And you know what I want to say? When Trump says, I'm going to impose 30% tariffs on Chinese goods, he doesn't worry about whether his customs will collect the tariffs or allow the goods to come in. He takes it for granted that the systems will work. You know one thing we've skipped? Where is the customs that is supposed to ensure that if we ban things, they remain banned?
Okay, there is some...
Sorry, Ayo, where is the Hamid Ali effect? We want an Hamid Ali effect, just the way we've had an Ishak Oloyede effect.
When you talk about Ishak Oloyede effect,
yes,
you talked about revenue being remitted to the federal government rising. You've seen that with the customs too. So isn't that enough Hamid Ali effect?
No, I'm saying that there are two things.
Okay.
The revenue rising is good, but beyond the revenue rising, let me go to the Oloyede effect again. It's not only that revenue rose, there was transparency in the halls. People went to the exam halls and it became difficult to cheat. It became electronic. Okay. So what I'm saying is that we need a situation where we say, we have a customs, where we say if we ban rice, it's banned. If we ban milk, it is banned. It is crucial that when we say things must work, we have institutions that make it work.
Okay, let's take this track from the CBN governor. He has something to say about
1.22 to 11.61 between September and October, and that mainly is because of border closure. And I'm saying, okay, I am not going to entirely disagree that yes, because of border closure that has resulted in some supply shortages, right? A drop in supply because of goods that were being smuggled or dumped into the country. But I also look at it from another side. Who are those who are benefiting? In as much as I do not like the fact that prices went up momentarily by 0.3% between September and October, the beneficiaries are Nigerians, right? And the beneficiaries are Nigerian companies, right? Where we've seen a situation where people now have jobs, right? Farmers who produce, for instance, rice, or who produce poultry, or even those who even legitimately import cars into the country are those that are benefiting from it. So what am I saying in essence? In as much as I do not like the fact that the inflationary pressures are coming up right now, but I'm also saying that it will moderate and very, very quickly. And I'm saying lag period, maximum, another 3 to 4 months, the inflation will moderate and aggressively downwards.
You know, fundamentally, like I said, there are shocks you need in order to alter structural distortions or structural weaknesses. We need to produce more. And the things we choose to produce more, we should create an environment to support its production. So if we must shut our borders, so be it. Okay. However, some of the things I think we're leaving out is that there is a greater danger of another kind of shock which will lead to inflation, which is the federal government's fiscal position. That is the one that will be non-productive. That is the one where we will have inflation and there will be no opportunity for productivity to grow. In fact, that's where I think there should be a lot of concern. But for what he said, you know, what I don't know is, will we in 3 or 4 months be able to produce enough to substitute? I'm not sure. But I think the point to make is the reason why we're doing this is because it's good and it's healthy for us. And we should see it through.
Okay. Let's take this quick question from Alpo in Abuja. Alpo.
Well, sadly, you know, the interview is being played piecemeal, and we were not able to get the full picture of some of the things that the CBN governor has said. I spoke with him yesterday, and he you know, we spoke for close to 30 minutes or thereabouts, and he had a number of things to say on a number of issues. One of them is institutional failure, which he also addressed. He acknowledged that indeed our institutions have not been top-notch. That's one of the reasons why we've had to have a total border closure. However, he also, you know, points out the policies of neighboring countries, which seem to undermine the policies that the federal government puts in place, which he says now is being addressed. So, for instance, Nigeria will put maybe high tariffs on rice or tomato puree, as the case might be, and the neighboring countries will bring down their own tariffs on it, or even scrap it totally. How do we begin to address the fact that in this ECOWAS arrangement which we have and which we participate in, that we have not been exercising our rights, or should we say taking up our position as big brother? And how would you say that has affected our economy in the scheme of things?
No, essentially, what has been happening is that we have actually been playing the big brother without getting benefit for it, without getting recognition for it. So when we ban something, which our neighbors then allow to go in, to come into Nigeria through their borders, through grey markets, and we lose customs revenues to them, we lose employment to them in terms of movement of goods, we're substantially carrying those economies, but we get no benefits for it. It's grey, it's not recognized. So now, we can't afford to continue to carry them like that. If Benin Republic, Togo, or any country needs budget support from Nigeria, let's talk about it transparently and say this is what we will give you. So we give you directly, but not through things which compromise our own structure of production. I do understand that the ECOWAS Treaty or the ACFA Treaty, for example, says that transshipment of goods on which significant value has not been added is not allowed. So you can't say you're in some West African country, you bring goods from Belgium, you repackage it, and you say you've added value. So it's a big shock for our neighbors, you know. But if we're going to carry you, let's carry you in a way that doesn't damage us.
Okay. Ope has more.
I think it's a point to make. Just quickly, let me add this one. I'm looking at, you know, the general picture. You talked about, will 3 to 4 months be enough time for Nigerians to face production? I want to ask what your own honest assessment is. Do you think that people are willing to go into manufacturing? Are you seeing more people seeing opportunities available? Do they trust that government to be able to follow through with its policies? I'm asking you this as an economist and one who perhaps would have had conversation with people who are in business and maybe those who would like to go into business as well. How do they see the general climate for doing business?
The general climate for business is very tough. It's very harsh. And people legitimately are not positive. It's a hard and harsh environment. And one of the mistakes we must not make.
What makes it hard?
Look at power. Look at logistics. Look at how long it takes to clear goods at the ports.
But
Look at
all these things are factored into your business plan, knowing the Nigerian economy, Nigerian climate.
Those are the things that in reality, they're there. But they make it hard to do business. I mean, if I may suggest, for example, if you ask me to come to the studio for this interview, you guys hold your hearts in your hands for me to show up. That shouldn't be part of your headache. That's a real difficulty that the Nigerian environment that has nothing to do with broadcasting.
So back to Malcolm's question. Yes. You initially said 3 to 4 months, you know.
3 to 4 months, I think that is the danger of eroding the gains of what we want to do. If we if we want to get productive, we've identified 1-2 products, for example. There's no reason why we should spend $1 billion on rice. We should substantially, from where we are at, we should substantially eat what we produce and produce what we eat.
So we can still spend that $1 billion, but it should be inside.
Yes, it should be inside. I mean, see, the problem will be 3 to 4 months won't work. And now if we now reverse things in 3 to 4 months, we lose the gains. And it will appear as if it was futile. It's not futile. There was a period where China shut its borders. I mean, why are we have 100 million, we are approaching 100 million people living below the poverty line. Why are we importing what we will eat? Why can't we produce what we will eat? For God's sake, I went to some of the northern states over the weekend, the Sahel region. You see flat lands where you don't need land preparation. I've had difficulties before, and I'm sorry to get personal here. Once, one of the organizations where I was serving on the board was disrupted. I called my son, and I said, sorry, you can't go to the same school that your sister went. I can't afford it now. People live within their means. We can't continue to live above our means. We simply can't continue to import food. We don't produce cars. We don't produce aeroplanes. We don't produce satellites. We don't produce drones. Why won't we produce food? What are we going to produce if we don't feed ourselves?
I think Malcolm still has one more question for you now. Malcolm?
Well, your frustration is palpable, sir. And I think that I felt the same thing also from the CBN governor yesterday. But just quickly, let me ask you this. What do you think is our competitive advantage in the goods that have been banned? I don't know if you see anywhere where we can actually have an advantage, a competitive edge in some of the goods that have been banned.
Margaret, you know, all those of us who are economists should cover our eyes in shame at some of the things we gobble down and we've not changed. There's nothing again like comparative advantage. The world has moved on. What you want to produce, you can create the advantage to produce. So even people without the weather to produce certain products, create greenhouses. We choose what, in today's world, we choose what we want to do, and you create the advantage, even if you don't have it. Technology has moved past being incapacitated because your environment is not suited to producing something. So, Mark, just to make the point, there is nothing we ban that if we set our hearts to it and we create the environment to make, we can't make, and we should make. And I want to ask Ayo and Kayode and Malpe, you see, on this issue of inflation, I wouldn't actually worry much about the inflation that is coming from the border. You know the inflation I will worry about? The inflation I will worry about is that if you look at half year 2019, government revenue was 2 trillion, but revenue expenditure was 3.3 trillion. You know, in simple language, it is a man who earns 200,000 naira monthly who says, on school fees and on feeding the family, I spend 330,000. That is where non-productive inflation will come from. You know, if we ban goods at the border and the prices rise, that will not necessarily be positive, but it has a potential to be positive because it's inflation that creates room for us to start to produce, generate employment.
Quick one before we tee off here. We sign out on this segment. What policy of government do we need to activate now to speed things up, if possible?
Ayo, thanks for asking this. I will actually plead that we start to appeal to the president and the technocrats that have the attention of the president, like Malam El-Rufai, like the vice president, that this budget is not implementable, that the budget should be recalled. And one of the things that we should do now is focus on revenue expenditure. But that revenue expenditure should be damn efficient. One, there should be 3 or 4 firms, consortiums, which will engage. Each consortium should have an accountant and a QS. Our objective should be to reduce overhead expenses of the federal government by 50 to 70%.
You know, I would like to find out what you think should be done with the budget. I mean, yes, recall it, but are you saying it should be slashed or should be increased? But then we'll have to go for a quick break. Yeah. And when we return, you'll at least help us understand what should be done. Should we cut it down? Should we increase it? You tell us after the break.
Money matters are matters of urgent national importance, if we can use that. And of course, we're talking about Nigeria's economic policies this morning. We still have Mr. Kola here, who is an economist and MD of his own organization. Well, Kadi asked a question before we went on break. You said we should recall the budget. What should we do to it? Expand it? Reduce it?
No, clearly we need to reduce the budget. And the context in which I said we should recall the budget was for half year 2019, budgeted revenue was 3.5 trillion. We did only 58%, which is 2 trillion. On that 2 trillion for revenue expenditure, just salaries and overheads, we spent 3.3 trillion. If you add debt service, it may take it to 4 trillion. Let's reduce this to simple language. It's like a man whose monthly income is 200,000, but his income on his domestic staff, his school fees, right, is 330,000, and on debt which he owes, which he must service, takes it to 400,000. It's not sustainable. So, and then the budget kind of encourages us not to face facts by saying we made only 2 trillion in 6 months.
So we hope to make more.
If you double that, that's 4 trillion. We now say that next year we will have 8 trillion. Where is it going to come from?
Well, clearly, I mean, there's room for, there have been a lot of options put on the table, like borrowing, of course, that's the usual place we resort to. But then, while this might make sense economically, remember I was asking, politically, do you think there's a will to also do that?
And that's why I want to say that again, you know, the professionals who have the president's ear. Remember that the president is a wartime veteran. He fought Nigerian Civil War. The president has been president before. He's been overthrown and he's gone to jail. He's fought 3 times to become president. I think the president has the nerve to do what it takes if the technocrats around him explain to him why we need to do this. I say this very soberly.
What about the people?
I say this with all sense of responsibility, that this budget shows we have a fiscal crisis.
But you know, one of the things
sorry, one moment.
Okay.
And because of that fiscal crisis, what the president should do is address the nation. We have a problem. We're going to stand by you, but all of us need to make sacrifices. You know, one thing that is worse than a crisis is to waste the crisis. There are 2 valuable things government can do with this crisis. One economic, one political. On the economic front, we can cut waste. We can cut expenses. We can change the structure of our budget. For example, put a 3 to 4 year moratorium on capital expenditure because we can't afford it. Then insist, like the government has, that any staff will pay must be electronic. So government will focus on 3 things: paying wages electronically without ghost workers, paying pensioners electronically without ghost pensioners, and paying overheads at private sector efficiency standards. Then there are some 2 sectors that have benefited from the economic policies of the last 30 years. The banks and a few corporations. Let those companies now do capital expenditure on PPP basis, and they will do it more efficiently. Those are the kind of things you can do with a crisis. Okay. That if you don't do in a crisis, you lose the opportunity.
Okay. Now, well, all those are, very good counsel, some would say. But then, talking about income for the government, I think part of that, is what this whole border closure thing has also been able to address, from what you said, the Hamid Ali effect and the Isha Kolede effect. But then this is one thing that the CBN governor said about the border closure.
There's too many things wrong that in 2013, Nigeria increases duty on rice, parboiled rice, right? Increased duty on parboiled rice to 70%. So that those who grow rice locally, right, can the price can be competitive. What happens is that Republic of Benin goes around, reduces the duty on parboiled rice from 35 to 7. Cameroon scraps duty from 10 to 0. These two countries eat what is called white rice. They don't eat parboiled rice. If they don't eat parboiled rice, then it will mean, it stands to reason to me, that the reason they reduce or scrapped duty for the importation of parboiled rice into their country is to undermine the economic policy of Nigeria, which is aimed at making the price of locally made rice competitive compared to its imported alternatives.
So how do you react to this one?
I think it's accurate. I think it's accurate.
But
Pardon me. Earlier on, you talked about some of the policies we make, how they seem, so they are textbook policies. The interest rate and the inflation rate always has to, one has to be above the other, and we say we are fine. But the big question is, seeing these policies we have made, how well have we been able to design custom-made policies such that we're not just copying and pasting, oh, China closed the border, let's close our border. This country is doing this, let's do this. How well have we been able to design custom-made policies that work for this country?
We haven't. And I will tell you one thing. I was just explaining to you that if you have a country where a large portion of the country is formal, a lot of the economic units, whether they are households or companies, borrow from the financial system. When you juggle interest rates, its impact on production, it's very visible and pervasive. It's different from ours. The inflation control effect of interest rates in an economy structured as ours, where there are very, very few borrowers, and there are only very few people who profit from high interest rates on deposits, is very minimal. So what are the things we need to realize? Is to say, the structure of our own economy, what we need is to encourage production and to work very hard to get foreign investment. And foreign investment isn't going to come from the people we traditionally call foreign investors who do portfolio investments. Foreign investment is going to come from two sources. And that is what we now sit and work hard and say, where will those investments? Foreign investment is going to come from, one, the Nigerians abroad, who without much incentive send us $25 billion. How can we get that $25 billion to be 100 or 150 or 200? Number two, and I hate to say this, how we deal with the oil sector in a radically different way. Kayode, you know what we need? Between these two segments, oil and diaspora investment. We've been talking about diaspora remittances. We now need to talk about diaspora investment. We need to look at how Nigeria will raise a minimum of $250 billion, maybe up to $1 trillion, that is not cash, that is going to be swapped with first-class world infrastructure. That is what will happen. But from where you started, we need to customize and understand how classical economic theories are misaligned with our realities, and then ensure that the ones we work with are things which we have customized. So, critically, Ayo, we need single-digit interest rates. Number two, we need to ensure that over a period, we try and defend the Naira within not more than a 10% band.
Okay. Well, we could go on and on because, as I said, matters of when it comes to money is something that touches everybody's heart. But then, there is a class of people that we have. We have to thank you very much, Mr. Kolayeye, who is an economist and CEO of GDL Asset Management Limited. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ayo.
Well, let's take a quick time out before we go to the next conversation. We'll be back.